Can a single shard of painted clay hold the weight of a hidden truth? In the heart of Seville, where the scent of orange blossoms mingled uneasily with the incense wafting from countless churches, Iselda Alvarez lived within such fragile confines. The year whispered its final decade, 1680-something, a time when the Spanish sun cast long, sharp shadows, and the memory of the Inquisition's fiercest fires still warmed the air with fear. Iselda's workshop, tucked away in a modest street near Triana, was a sanctuary of focused creation. Clay dust coated the floorboards, and vibrant pigments stained her skillful hands. She was a master ceramicist, her tiles sought after for their intricate beauty, yet her own existence was a carefully constructed mosaic, concealing the dangerous fragments of her converso heritage. Her dark, observant eyes missed little, absorbing the city's contradictions, the fervent public piety, the whispered anxieties, the casual cruelty veiled in righteousness. Survival was an art form she practiced daily, her outward composure a glaze over the simmering heat of her secrets. This fragile peace, however, was meant to be shattered. One patron, Don Rodrigo de Guzman, embodied the city's menace. A nobleman of impeccable lineage and chilling influence, his visits to her workshop were becoming more frequent. His sharp, cold eyes assessed her work, but lingered too long on her face, his praise laced with an undercurrent of possession. He spoke of purity, of order, his voice smooth as polished silver, yet Iselda felt the chill of his ambition, the hollowness behind the heavy cross he wore. He represented the power that scrutinized lives like hers, the power that could crush her with a word whispered in the right ear at the Castillo de San Jorge. She navigated his attention with practiced deference, her heart a tight knot of apprehension. Current part characters, 2008. Total characters, 2008. The humid Andalusian night was thick with the Guadalquivir's muddy breath when Iselda found him. He lay crumpled in the narrow alley behind her workshop, a shadow amongst shadows, groaning softly. Rough traveller's clothes, torn and stained, couldn't entirely hide an underlying structure, a hint of bearing that spoke of a different life. A fading scar marked his temple. Hesitation warred with an instinctive flicker of recognition, not of his face, but of the hunted look in his eyes, the same guarded vulnerability she carried within herself. Bringing a stranger into her home, especially one clearly fleeing trouble, was madness. A single careless word, a suspicious neighbor, and the fragile protection her family had cultivated for generations could crumble. Yet leaving him felt like abandoning a piece of herself. With a furtive glance down the deserted alley, she made her decision. Supporting his weight, she half-dragged, half-carried him through her back door into the relative safety of her cluttered workshop, the scent of damp clay and turpentine momentarily masking the metallic tang of blood. His name, he whispered later, when fever loosened his tongue slightly, was Mateo de Silva. He offered no more, and she didn't press. She cleaned his wounds, noting the fineness of his features beneath the grime, the intelligence that flickered even through the pain in his eyes. She brought him broth and water, moving with quiet efficiency, her own fear a constant cold companion. Days bled into nights. Mateo slowly regained strength, confined to a small back room hidden behind stacks of tiles and drying racks. Their conversations began tentatively, fragments exchanged in hushed tones. He spoke of philosophy, of stars, of ideas that danced dangerously close to heresy, his knowledge startling in its depth. She spoke of her art, of the stories hidden in patterns, the language of color and form. A connection sparked between them, fragile yet undeniable, forged in shared secrecy and intellectual curiosity. She saw the disillusionment clouding his gaze, the weariness of someone who had seen too much, trusted too easily. He saw the fierce intelligence behind her reserved demeanor, the resilience etched into the lines around her eyes. He learned of the delicate balancing act of her life, the constant vigilance required by her converso blood, a heritage whispered only in the safest corners of her home, marked by traditions veiled in Catholic observance. Meanwhile, Don Rodrigo's presence became a heavier shadow. He commissioned a large set of tiles for his private chapel, a task requiring Iselda to visit his opulent residence near the Alcazar. Each visit was an ordeal. His house suffocated with dark wood, heavy velvet, and the stifling scent of old money and incense. He would guide her through silent rooms, his hand occasionally brushing her arm, his questions probing subtly about her family, her faith, her associations. His inquiries about any strangers seen in the neighborhood made her blood run cold. He was searching, she knew, searching for the fugitive his men had failed to capture, the man now hidden mere streets away. His suspicion was a tangible thing, coiling in the air between them. One afternoon, Rodrigo presented her with a challenge, framed as a test of her artistic devotion. He desired a central tile panel for his chapel depicting the triumph of faith over heresy. He described the scene with relish, faith radiant and serene, heresy grotesque and vanquished. "Capture the essence, Iselda," he commanded, his eyes boring into hers. "Show the clarity of divine truth, the ugliness of doubt." It was more than a commission. It was a loyalty test, a trap laid with pious words. That night, despair gnawed at Iselda. How could she create such a piece without betraying her own hidden self, without vomiting up the hypocrisy Rodrigo embodied? She spoke of it to Matteo, her voice tight with frustration. He listened intently, his brow furrowed. Then, quietly, he began to speak, not of blind faith, but of light and shadow, of the beauty that could exist even in complexity, the strength found not in suppression, but in understanding. He sketched ideas, referencing obscure texts, suggesting compositions that subtly shifted the narrative. Together they devised a design. Faith was still central, but her light seemed to emanate from within, illuminating rather than merely condemning heresy, who appeared less monstrous, more tragically lost, reaching towards the light even in defeat. It was brilliant, nuanced, and dangerously ambiguous. Iselda executed the design with trembling hands, pouring all her skill into the complex glazing, the subtle interplay of colours. When presented, Rodrigo studied it for a long time, his expression unreadable. "Intriguing," he murmured, a flicker of something sharp in his eyes. "You have a unique perspective, Iselda." He accepted the work, but Iselda felt no relief, only the certainty that she had both impressed and unsettled him, perhaps confirming his nascent suspicions. His mentor, a brilliant philosopher exploring ideas deemed heretical by the Church, ideas about the nature of the universe, the limits of dogma, had been arrested by the Inquisition. Matteo, his devoted student, had defended him, questioning the accusations, pleading for reason. This act marked him. Though he escaped immediate arrest, whispers followed him. His family, fearing the taint, distanced themselves. Powerful enemies of his mentor now saw Matteo as a loose end, a carrier of dangerous thought. Don Rodrigo, it turned out, was aligned with those enemies, his pursuit driven by political expediency as much as pious fervour. "To men like Rodrigo," Matteo said, his voice low and bitter, "an independent thought is more dangerous than a sword. Reason is its own kind of heresy in times like these." Iselda listened, her heart aching with empathy. She understood the weight of being judged not for who you were, but for what you represented, for the blood in your veins, or the ideas in your mind. She confessed the full extent of her own family's hidden traditions, the constant fear of denunciation that had shaped her life. In that shared vulnerability, their feelings crystallized. A touch, a lingering gaze, a whispered word, love bloomed, fragile and defiant in the heart of the storm. But their precarious sanctuary was about to be breached. Perhaps it was a rival artisan, jealous of Iselda's skill and whispering poison in Rodrigo's ear. Perhaps it was a beggar paid to watch her door. Or perhaps Rodrigo, his suspicions solidified by the chapel tile and Iselda's subtle defiance, simply decided to tighten the net. One sweltering afternoon, as Iselda returned from delivering a small order, she saw them, Rodrigo's liveried men, emerging from the alley behind her workshop. They weren't empty-handed. Between them, struggling weakly, his face bruised and bloodied, was Matteo. Their eyes met for a fleeting, shattering second across the sun-drenched street, his filled with despair, hers with cold, paralyzing terror. Rodrigo himself stood watching from a distance, a thin smile playing on his lips, a look of grim satisfaction. Iselda froze, rooted to the spot, the ceramic shards she carried suddenly weighing a ton. She couldn't scream, couldn't run, couldn't do anything but watch as they dragged Matteo away, disappearing around the corner towards the looming shadow of authority, towards the dungeons where reason went to die. The world tilted, the vibrant colours of Seville fading to grey ash. Matteo was gone, swallowed by the very power she had feared all her life. For a day, Iselda moved through her workshop like a ghost, the silence amplifying Mateo's absence. Grief warred with fury, helplessness with a desperate, burgeoning resolve. Rodrigo had sprung his trap, believing her cowed, believing Mateo silenced. He underestimated the fire beneath the glaze. She wouldn't let Mateo perish in the dark. She wouldn't let Rodrigo win. But what could she, a woman of suspect blood, an artisan with no influence, do against a man like de Guzman? The answer came not from logic, but from a desperate whisper of folklore, a name spoken carefully among those who lived on the city's edges. Zara, the gitana, healer, fortune-teller, trickster, a woman said to command herbs, shadows, and secrets. Seeking her out was a risk almost as great as sheltering Mateo. The gitanos were marginalized, distrusted, often accused of witchcraft. Association could be damning, yet conventional avenues were closed. Desperation forged courage. Following hushed directions, Iselda ventured to the outskirts of Seville, towards the dusty plains beyond the city walls, where the Gitano community lived in makeshift camps and hidden caves near the riverbank. She found Zara's dwelling, part cave, part shack, adorned with drying herbs and strange symbols that seemed to hum with latent energy. Zara herself was older than Iselda expected, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and shrewd observation. Sharp, intelligent eyes appraised Iselda from head to toe, missing nothing. She smoked a clay pipe, the smoke curling around her like a protective shroud. "You come seeking shadows, Nina," Zara stated, her voice raspy, layered with the Callao dialect. There was no preamble, no feigned ignorance. Iselda, heart-pounding, explained everything. Mateo, Rodrigo, the capture, her own precarious position. She laid bare her fear and her determination. Zara listened patiently, puffing on her pipe, her expression unreadable. When Iselda finished, silence stretched, broken only by the distant cry of a river bird. "Don Rodrigo," Zara finally spat the name like a curse. "He casts a long shadow, that one. Thinks his piety washes his hands clean." She fixed Iselda with a piercing gaze. "And you risk the fire for this scholar." Iselda met her gaze steadily. "He carries light. Rodrigo seeks only to extinguish it. I cannot let that happen." A slow nod from Zara. Perhaps it was Iselda's resolve, perhaps a shared hatred for the arrogant nobleman who harassed her people, perhaps a flicker of unexpected compassion. The righteous, Zara mused, drawing on her pipe, are often the easiest to trip. Their own certainty blinds them. She agreed to help. Not for charity, perhaps, a fair price would be expected, but Iselda sensed a deeper motive, a satisfaction in disrupting the power that oppressed them all. Current part characters, 3005 total characters, 4208. The planning began in secret, hushed conversations in the dead of night within Zara's smoky dwelling or the shadowed corners of Iselda's workshop. Zara possessed an intricate understanding of Seville's underbelly, its superstitions, its fears, the hidden currents of gossip and belief. Their plan wouldn't involve direct confrontation, but manipulation, illusion, playing on the very piety Rodrigo used as his shield. The upcoming feast day of Santa Justa and Santa Rufina, patron saints of Seville and, fittingly, potters, provided the perfect stage. A major procession was planned, a public display of devotion that Rodrigo, in his capacity as a city official and pillar of the church, would prominently attend. Their strategy was twofold: discredit Rodrigo publicly through a staged event hinting at divine displeasure, and create a diversion to facilitate Mateo's escape. Zara tapped into her network. Gitanos, disgruntled servants, street performers, individuals invisible to men like Rodrigo, perfect for spreading rumors and assisting with illusions. Iselda's role was crucial. Her artistic skills were repurposed. She meticulously studied the processional route, noting vantage points, escape routes. Using her access to Rodrigo's house from the chapel commission, she recalled details, layouts, routines, even Rodrigo's known vices hidden beneath his austere facade. She began crafting small, seemingly insignificant objects, perhaps tiles with subtle imperfections hinting at decay, or pigments that could react strangely under specific conditions. Mateo, meanwhile, languished. Iselda managed, through a carefully bribed guard Zara knew, to smuggle a message to him, coded words of hope hinting at a plan, urging him to be ready. His reply, scratched on a scrap of cloth, spoke of dwindling hope but unwavering spirit. The preparations were fraught with tension. Every knock on the door sent Iselda's heart leaping. Every encounter with Rodrigo, who now treated her with a dismissive confidence that grated more than his previous predatory interest, was a test of nerve. Zara procured strange substances, chemicals that could simulate tears on a statue, powders that produced unsettling smoke, inks that faded or appeared with moisture. She coached her allies, rehearsing whispers, timing cues. The plan was intricate, dangerous, relying on timing, crowd psychology, and sheer audacity. Failure meant not just Matteo's death, but likely Iselda's own ruin and potential discovery by the Inquisition. The feast day dawned hot and heavy, the Seville sky a blinding blue. Bells pealed across the city, calling the faithful. The air thrummed with anticipation, piety, and the underlying tension Iselda felt mirrored in her own chest. Dressed modestly, she positioned herself near the Plaza de San Francisco, where the procession would pause for prayers, close to the Ayuntamiento, Rodrigo's seat of power. Zara, disguised as a humble flower seller, was nearby, her network dispersed throughout the growing crowd. Matteo, Iselda prayed, had received the final signal. The timing passed through the bribed guard. Don Rodrigo arrived, resplendent in black velvet, his face arranged in lines of solemn devotion, taking his place among the city dignitaries. The procession began, chanting priests, swaying incense burners, floats bearing statues of the saints. As it reached the plaza and the prayers began, Zara gave a subtle signal. A murmur rippled through the crowd near a prominent statue of Santa Justa. People pointed, gasped. Dark, oily tears seemed to well from the statue's stone eyes, tracing slow paths down its serene face. A woman shrieked, "A miracle!" or a warning. Zara's allies fanned the flames, an ill omen. Displeasure from heaven. Who has angered the saints? Whispers turned to shouts, confusion bordering on panic. Eyes darted towards the dignitaries, settling uneasily on Don Rodrigo, whose pious mask momentarily slipped, revealing shock and anger. This was Phase 1. As chaos mounted near the statue, Iselda moved swiftly towards a side entrance of the Ayuntamiento, a route she knew from delivering tiles. This was Phase 2. Inside, using a duplicate key Zara had procured, she accessed a small office adjacent to Rodrigo's. Working quickly, she planted the items she'd prepared, ledgers subtly altered to hint at misused funds, leveraging gossip Zara had gathered, a small, exquisitely painted tile depicting a scene of worldly indulgence hidden amongst devotional objects, and a letter, seemingly discarded, containing compromising political statements Matteo had recalled Rodrigo making in private. It wasn't proof of heresy, but enough to sow seeds of doubt about his integrity, his piety. Outside, Zara signaled again. Phase 3. From a rooftop overlooking the plaza, a sudden, thick plume of black smoke erupted. Not fire, but an alchemical concoction that momentarily obscured the sun, casting an eerie pall. More cries arose. Simultaneously, near the church dungeon where Matteo was believed held, a loud commotion broke out. A staged fight, a diversion orchestrated by Zara's men. In the confusion, the bribed guard unlocked Matteo's cell. Weak but resolute, Matteo slipped out, melting into the terrified, chaotic crowd, guided by another of Zara's unseen helpers towards a prearranged escape route near the river. Back in the plaza, Rodrigo, visibly shaken, tried to restore order, his commands lost in the din. The focus had shifted. The miracle, the smoke, the unease, it clung to him now, the whispers questioning his righteousness, his favor with God. His authority, for the moment, was fractured. Iselda, heart-hammering, slipped back into the crowd, melting away before anyone noticed her brief absence. She had done her part. Now, only escape remained. Under the cloak of the ensuing twilight, deepened by the lingering unease that settled over Seville like dust, Iselda made her way towards the Guadalquivir. The city felt different, its familiar streets charged with nervous energy. She moved through shadowed alleys, avoiding main thoroughfares, her senses on high alert. Every distant shout, every closing shutter seemed a potential threat. She reached the agreed meeting point near the Puente de Triana, a dilapidated warehouse smelling of salt, fish, and decay. He was there. Matteo stood waiting in the deepest shadows, leaning against a damp wall, breathing heavily but whole. The sight of him, alive and free, sent a wave of relief so profound through Iselda that her knees nearly buckled. They didn't speak, couldn't risk it. A shared look conveyed everything, the fear, the gratitude, the desperate hope. Zara emerged silently from the darkness, a small bundle in her hands. "The boat is ready," she rasped, pressing the bundle into Iselda's hands, some coins, dried food, and a small carved wooden amulet. Rodrigo is preoccupied. His reputation weeps like the statue. A grim smile touched her lips. But Seville is no longer safe for you. Go north. Lose yourselves. She pointed towards a small skiff bobbing gently by the crumbling quay, manned by a silent Gitano boatman. There was a finality in Zara's tone, a sense that her part in their story was ending. Iselda whispered her thanks, pressing the payment they had agreed upon into Zara's hand, though she knew the Gitana's help went beyond coin. Zara merely nodded, melting back into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared, leaving behind only the scent of her pipe smoke and an aura of mystery. The boatman pushed off, the skiff gliding silently onto the dark water, leaving the troubled lights of Seville behind. They huddled together in the small boat, the rhythmic dip of the oars the only sound besides their own unsteady breaths. Looking back, the Giralda Tower, usually a symbol of home, seemed like a sentinel guarding a gilded cage they had just escaped. The river carried them downstream, away from the city, away from Don Rodrigo's reach, towards an uncertain future. They had nothing but each other, the clothes on their backs and the few coins from Zara, but they were free. Their journey north was arduous, marked by caution and scarcity. They travelled mostly by night, avoiding large towns, taking work where they could find it. Matteo using his knowledge discreetly to tutor or scribe, Iselda finding occasional work repairing pottery or creating small crafts. They learned to live on the fringes, to trust their instincts, their bond deepening with every shared hardship, every narrow escape from suspicion. They settled, eventually, in a smaller city in the north of Spain, perhaps Leon or Burgos, far from the heat and intrigue of Andalusia. They chose new names, built a new, quiet life. Iselda found a small space where she could work with clay again, her art now infused with the melancholy beauty of their experiences, themes of resilience, hidden light, the strength found in fragile things. Matteo, finding solace in books and quiet study, began to write, exploring the philosophical questions that had once endangered him, but now with the wisdom gained through suffering. News from Seville filtered through occasionally, carried by travelling merchants or itinerant monks. Don Rodrigo de Guzman's star had indeed waned. The rumours sparked by the miracle festered, fueled perhaps by political rivals sensing weakness. Whispers of financial impropriety, bolstered by the evidence Iselda planted, led to investigations. While he likely avoided the full wrath of the Inquisition himself, his influence was curtailed, his reputation permanently stained. He remained a man of some means, but the aura of untouchable power was gone, replaced by bitterness and suspicion. There was also news, months later, that the political winds had shifted. The faction that had persecuted Matteo's mentor lost favour at court. New evidence emerged, or perhaps old enemies simply fell silent, and Matteo's name was quietly cleared of the most serious accusations, though returning to his former life was impossible and undesirable. It wasn't a grand pardon delivered by royal decree, but a slow, bureaucratic fading of the threat, enough to allow him to breathe a little easier, to shed the constant fear of looking over his shoulder. Their new life wasn't grand. They lived modestly, the shadows of their past never fully receding. Iselda still felt a pang of anxiety when church bells rang too loudly. Matteo flinched at unexpected knocks, but they had found a measure of peace, a freedom hard-won through courage, intellect, and the audacity to challenge a system designed to crush them. Years passed. Iselda's workshop became known locally for the unique quality of her ceramics, the quiet depth of her designs. Matteo became a respected, if unassuming, teacher and writer, valued for his thoughtful perspectives. They never forgot Zara, the enigmatic gitana who had been their unlikely saviour, though they never heard from her again. Sometimes Iselda would hold the small wooden amulet she had given them, feeling the smooth wood, wondering about the woman who navigated the world's sharp edges with such fierce pragmatism. Their love, forged in the crucible of fear and deception, endured, a quiet testament to their shared journey. It wasn't the passionate, desperate grasp of their Seville days, but a deeper companionship built on mutual respect, shared memories, and the quiet joy of survival. They had faced the darkness together, the arrogance of power, the chill of prejudice, the very real threat of annihilation, and emerged, scarred but whole, into the light. Looking at Matteo across their simple table, the northern sunlight warming the lines on his face, Iselda would sometimes trace the patterns on a nearby tile, a design of interwoven vines sheltering a hidden star. True worth, she knew, wasn't measured in purity of blood or loudness of faith, but in the resilience of the human spirit, the courage to seek truth, and the light one could kindle even in the deepest shadows. Their story wasn't one of triumphant return or societal acclaim, but a quieter victory, the victory of finding freedom, love, and a space to simply be, against formidable odds, proving that even the most gilded cage could not hold a spirit, determined to fly, nor could the most oppressive darkness extinguish a cleverly hidden star. Their story wasn't one of triumphant return or societal acclaim, but a quieter victory, the victory of finding freedom, love, and a space to simply be, against formidable odds, proving that even the most gilded cage could not hold a spirit. Their past was a part of them, a complex glaze enriching the clay of their present, a reminder of the fragility of peace and the enduring power of hope nurtured in secret. They learned to read the changing seasons in the northern sky, so different from the relentless sun of Andalusia. The crisp autumn air brought a sharpness that felt clean after Seville's heavy perfumes. Winter snows muffled the world, offering a blanket of quiet anonymity they came to cherish. Spring arrived with tentative blossoms, mirroring the cautious hope they allowed themselves to feel. Iselda taught Matteo the language of clay, the patience required to shape and fire it, the alchemy of glazes. He, in turn, shared his world of letters, reading aloud in the evenings from books he managed to acquire, discussing ideas without the constant fear of reprisal. Their home, though modest, became a true sanctuary, filled not with hidden anxieties but with shared knowledge and quiet affection. Occasionally a traveller from the south might pass through, bringing news that stirred old memories. They learned of shifts in power, of old families rising and falling, confirming the transient nature of the influence they had once feared so intensely. Don Rodrigo, they heard, grew old and isolated, his earlier ruthlessness curdling into a bitter paranoia, haunted perhaps not by divine displeasure, but by the memory of his public humiliation and the whispers that never entirely faded. It offered a grim sort of satisfaction, though pity was too complex an emotion to afford him. They never sought to reclaim Matteo's family name or status. That world felt distant, its values hollowed out by their experiences. Their nobility lay not in lineage, but in the integrity they had maintained under duress, the choices they had made when fear dictated otherwise. Iselda sometimes incorporated subtle gitano patterns into her work, a hidden homage to Zara, a reminder of the unexpected alliances forged in adversity, the wisdom found outside the walls of accepted society. It was her way of keeping that connection alive, acknowledging the debt that could never truly be repaid. Their life wasn't without challenges. Suspicion, even in the north, could arise from neighbours noticing their quiet ways, their lack of obvious family ties. But they had learned discretion, the art of blending in, of offering just enough of themselves to satisfy curiosity without revealing the core of their past. The fear never vanished completely, but it became a dull ache rather than a sharp terror, a reminder to remain vigilant. Current part characters, 26 and 24, total characters, 3051. Their greatest joy came in the small moments, sharing a simple meal, watching the sunset paint the sky, the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done, the comfort of knowing they faced the world together. Iselda's hands, once stained only with clay and pigment, sometimes bore the ink smudges from helping